So I've been working in this space now pretty much for 30 years. And I think in the past, I would have said that we had a bit more time to really think through leadership and have all the right conversations that we needed to have. I'm feeling now, as the new president of the Club of Rome, and taking into consideration that the Limits to Growth, our first publication alerting the world to the fact that we needed to really focus on consumption and the impact on our planetary boundaries. That was published 50 years ago. And so I'm feeling a sense of urgency. We've obviously seen the IPCC report, now also the LAMS report, looking both at biodiversity and climate convergence. So for me, leadership now is about ambition. And it's about being able to be brave enough to turn around these emergencies into unbelievable opportunities to emerge from emergency. And how do we do that? Taking the leadership of some of the best companies out there that are really looking at decarbonization. I think there's been an unbelievable transition in Europe, both in terms of policy and also in terms of business moves towards the right conversations in their value chain and also stepping up to the plate. And I commend Eurelectric for being a real leader in moving in this direction with the power sector. So we often at the Club of Rome and through many of my other hats, we talk about a systems approach. And I don't think that any actor can do this alone, whether it be individual, whether it be a policymaker, or whether it be a business leader. I think we need to increasingly have those conversations I was speaking about, but also immediately think about where did we fail and where can we succeed? And having the readiness to, as I said, be bold and move together fast. We've been told we have the next 10 years from the Secretary General. We're all going to the UN in a couple of weeks' time at the Climate Summit. And the Secretary General has said if we don't respond in these next 10 years, this will be collective suicide. No one wants to have collective suicide. So there's a real personal sense of responsibility that each business leader as well as policymaker individual needs to have. But then we need to be smart and sophisticated in the way in which we bring everyone together to have the right conversations. One of those areas, which I think is very important, which is very key to the way in which we suffered last year, was the difference between the kind of the Gilets jaunes end of the month and the protests, the student protests on climate change end of the planet. We need to try to bring those together. We need to look at the radicalization of the right and the left and the moving of the green in the center and figure out how can we permeate all of our conversations, our solutions, by an understanding that actually we will be much better off as humanity if we really solve these emergencies now by working together. So one of the calls that I made with Anders Wijkman, who's also a former member of the European Parliament and also a member of the Club of Rome, and Johan Rockström, who's very well known in the climate, a real rock star from the Potsdam Institute, we published an op-ed calling on the European Commission and the new president to really have a VP in charge of biodiversity and climate. And we're pleased to see that in the new proposals that we're going to see today, we might have a proposal for a VP, and that VP may be Timmermans. So we will see if that does come to fruition. I think that the Green New Deal has to be about how can we get the leadership in the business world and some of the citizens groups together with policymakers right now, also alongside the whole thinking around research and innovation. And how do we think about short-term injection points? What are the policy enablers, the tax mechanisms, using our new sustainable finance work that I've also been doing in the European Commission in order to ensure that capital goes into that Green New Deal. So that means new business models, green projects, low carbon projects, but also projects that are not having a social or a biodiversity impact. And by the same token, the way in which we work with the rest of the world. Europe has the possibility now to take a real leadership on its new Green New Deal thinking and the way in which it has bilateral trade agreements, the way in which it engages into conversations with other countries across the globe, not only on climate, but also on biodiversity, on forest preservation, as we've seen now in the Amazon, on preserving the Arctic, as we've seen now also with all the issues in terms of Greenland, and indicate what are the business models, what are the financial models, what are the policy models that we can actually use in order to ensure that our Green New Deal is not just a European deal, but a global deal. It has to be a worldwide dream. And I think that, again, coming back to the moral compass, clearly some of our leadership has lost sight of what it is to be a real leader, to lead for others, not just to lead for themselves, in particular the country that I grew up in, the United States. And I think that we need to find ways to work with the Chinese, to work with the Japanese. I've just come back from Japan, and the government is very much looking at wanting to be a new leader again. They've done amazing things in mobility, and we can look at their mobility models. So both in terms of exchanging ideas, but also in ensuring that Europe does not lose sight of its ambition and its boldness on climate. We've been now very ambitious, and we've shown ourselves as a leader over the last 10 years. And I think we need to continue to do that. But we also need to be one step ahead with our business community and go hand in hand in terms of showing the rest of the world that actually we can have a new economic model that works, that preserves our industrial base, that preserves many of our companies, but by the same token decouples emissions from growth, and also looks at what growth actually really means. Can we now look at a well-being society? Can we look at more access to electricity and low-carbon electricity for citizens, which doesn't cost an arm and a leg? How do we help industry ensure that they give that not only here, but also in Africa, also in Latin America, in Asia, and other countries? Yeah, it's interesting because I think I fluctuate between despair and hope. So I'm glad that I'm coming off as super positive, but the challenges are huge. And I think part of that is conversations that I've been having around that human dimension. That too long, actually, the environmental movement has been more concerned about preserving ecosystems rather than ensuring that people feel that there's a role for themselves. And we do have a great disparity between the haves and the have-nots. I think the best way to demonstrate to the Gilets jaunes that actually they can also protest in the street for the environment is to show them the direct benefits. Part of that is also reaching out to the rural communities. We've done a lot in talking about new urban planning, in ensuring that we bring power to urban centers. We've got unbelievable city mayors that are working in our urban centers across Europe and also in the United States and across the globe. But we've lost sight a little bit of those that are the most disenfranchised, who really are struggling, who have to travel several hours in order to get to an urban center, who are working in the agricultural or the rural communities, or who may not even have work. What does this mean for them? And so the only thing that we can give them is a better quality of life. And for us, at least at the Club of Rome, a better quality of life does not necessarily mean that it needs to be a lot of more money in your pocket. It just means that we need to optimize the money that you have, that we need to ensure that you're part of this new journey. And to do that, we need to have the right conversations. We need to work also with the unions, and I think that the International Trade Union Confederation and also the European Trade Union Confederation are doing an amazing job of trying to bring in those conversations, ensuring that the Polish miners feel that they might have other types of work in low carbon options. So those are the types of conversations that we need to have. Concretely, we need to have a transition budget. We need to ensure that we talk about a just transition, and that those, again, that are in those communities that might not feel the benefits of decarbonization right away are really given some options so that they do understand that this is a real good and a real well-being economy for all. And that's part of these little, badges that I have here. I think it's important to hit a variety of different communities. So obviously I have the UN SDG, and I think the UN process is fundamental. It needs to be upped a bit in terms of also the conversations with other countries. I think the Secretary General is trying to do that, and I hope that his real push for impact and access to new solutions over the next year will really help. This is also Sustainable Energy for All. Having worked with Sustainable Energy for All and many of the power companies that are members of Eurelectric who are part of Sustainable Energy for All, including Enel and EDP and others, the big issue there has been access to energy and ensuring that while we talk about energy and decarbonization here, we ensure that actually the world's many poor, in particular in African countries, and women have access. And then the last is the Extinction Rebellion. And I think that we need to build on all those different forces because they also have an important voice and an important role to play in activating the consciousness of more people. So it's the activists, it's the business community, it's the policy leaders, it's the institutions, it's all the different actors that need to come together under a new climate emergency roadmap, so that we can really ensure that we can emerge from emergency. I think so, and I think again what we're trying to do at the Club of Rome, I mean I'm the youngest first woman president of the Club of Rome. So you can imagine, we have members who were there from the very beginning 50 years ago. Our oldest member is 95. I talk about an intergenerational dialogue. We have tried to bring in more youth into the Club of Rome, but I think we need to ensure that the youth are not just in the streets, but they're also in the boardroom, that they're starting to come in and be assimilated in some of the decision making. Now, by the same token, what I also say to them is if you're going to come in, you need to push for solutions. We can't just talk about gloom and doom. We can't just say it's your responsibility. It's all of our responsibilities. And now climate is not about the next generation, it's about our generation. So together we need to come up with the solutions. And we need, whether it be through Eurelectric and some of the power solutions, that needs to come down to those youth in the streets so they understand that when they go and pound their fists and actually get to be able to speak to mayors, etc., they can have a whole bunch of information saying, and here are some of the solutions. That's what we're trying to do with our climate emergency plan and now our planetary emergency plan that we will launch actually in New York at the UN summit, which very much brings in the biodiversity and the climate tipping points together and has really some core actions that need to be taken before 2030. So working with the youth, enabling them to have both a voice, but also to bring forward the solutions that we can start to see. I think that's very important. Thank you. I am trying to lead the charge. We're trying to lead the charge through the Club of Rome, and I really hope that Eurelectric will continue to lead the charge, as well as other businesses and business associations across Europe